Wendell Griffen, our renowned speaker. Let's applaud him. Why don't we stand and give him the honor that he so rightfully deserves? We love Jesus.
Thank you, Missionary Marshall. Please be seated, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
And it is a good morning. I want to acknowledge Missionary Marshall, Mr. Quinn, James White, Dr. Olson, Reverend clergy, community leaders, faculty members, students of all ages. I want to acknowledge Mr. Zachary Pike and Ms. Annie Zachary and Pike and Victor Zachary. Amen. Bless you for your presence. And I would also like to acknowledge all of the people who have come from the Fund for Reparations Now, as well as you who have come from elsewhere to this great place called Elaine. This great place called Elaine. I am especially thankful for these young people. Thank you for being here. I will tell you something that will probably surprise you. I'm 70 years old, and I was a grown man. I was a lawyer before I learned about the Elaine Massacre. I had gone through college. I'd been in the military. I taught race relations. I had finished law school.
Yes.
I'm going to talk about Moore versus Dempsey, a Supreme Court case that you have to learn in law school, but nobody told me about Elaine.
Right.
And it was not until I got to Little Rock, Arkansas, and met a white lawyer named Griff Stockley, who is a friend of mine. Griff Stockley, who was a friend of mine, who was also went to church with me, and read Griff Stockley's book, Blood in Their Eye, that I got the chance to understand what my teachers did not teach me. When I learned the law. And so I'm glad to see you here. When people take you to historic places, if they haven't taken you to Elaine, they haven't taken you to enough places. They'll take you to Gettysburg, and they'll take you to all other places. Make sure they take you to Elaine, all right? Tell them the judge said so.
All right.
I have to use this while I can, because I'm about to run out of my judge powers at the end of the day. You know how it is. Use it or lose it. And so there it is. I also want to thank everyone who was involved in planning this. This is an annual pilgrimage. And as long as I have strength, I hope to be part of this, even if it's only in the audience, because quite frankly, this is as important to me now that I finally learned about it 50 years ago. Okay, not 50 years ago, 30 years ago. 30 years ago. It's important to me now as going to Independence Hall in Philadelphia is. All right? When you go to Philadelphia, they don't take you by Independence Hall. When you go to Williamsburg, they don't take you by. Right. When you go to Charlottesville, they don't take you by Monticello. This is important. And so I want to do this as long as I can, while I can go where I need to go on my own power, because I am a clerk of a certain age. Amen. And eventually gravity catches up with you. young people, gravity is not just a science, it's a reality. If you don't believe it, as the old folks say, just keep living. Keep living. I didn't understand what that meant until several years ago. And then I began to meet arthritis. No, I met arthritis. The title of my keynote address today is Challenging Racism in the Criminal and Legal Punishment System by Connecting the Dots between Moore versus Dempsey, 1923, and 2022. In 1923, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled in the case of Moore versus Dempsey that, by a 6-2 margin, that the trials of 6 of the Elaine 12, Frank Moore, Frank and Ed Hicks, Joe Knox, Paul Hall, and Ed Coleman, were dominated by a mob. Therefore, the court decided that the men were deprived of due process of law, guaranteed by the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, and reversed a decision by a federal district court in Arkansas that denied those men their plea for a writ of habeas corpus, following their convictions for murder. My keynote remarks for today's panel discussion will connect the dots between that decision and the injustice that is pervasive in what I insist should be called the criminal legal and punishment system, not the criminal justice system. It is not the criminal justice system. It is called the criminal legal and punishment system in the United States. The U.S. criminal legal and punishment system is unjust now, as it was in 1919 when white vigilantes attacked black families in Elaine. The vigilantes were joined, you may recall, by Arkansas Governor Charles Bruff and U.S. troops from Camp Pike, who took a train from Little Rock to Phillips County. In 1919, white civilians, politicians, and armed troops massacred hundreds of black men, women, and children. None of the white perpetrators of the Elaine Massacre of 1919 were prosecuted. None. As my grandma used to say, none. All right. Instead, black people were prosecuted, tried, convicted, and sentenced to die for the deaths of 5 white men, despite evidence that some of the white men were killed by what we call friendly fire. They were killed by white folks who were trying to kill black folks. Instead, the black survivors of the Elaine Massacre were told to be calm, go to work, and trust the criminal punishment system, while Governor Bruff and the white political, legal, religious, don't leave out the religious, and business community in Phillips County and across Arkansas blamed black people for the massacre. The largest dining facility on the main campus of the University of Arkansas was eventually named Bruff Commons, after Governor Bruff. I have a degree from the University of Arkansas, 2 of them. In 1968, I took my meals in Bruff Commons. I did not know that Bruff Commons was named after the governor, who had been the governor after the Elaine Massacre. It kept the name Bruff Commons until student protests in the wake of George Floyd's killing in 2020 pressured University of Arkansas administrators and trustees to remove Bruff's name from it in 2021. Now, some of us, Dr. Olson and some of us, folks in Elaine and I, were trying to get the University of Arkansas to rename Bruff Commons Elaine 12 Commons. But as my father used to say, that would have been too much like Wright. And so they call it 1021 West Dixon Food Court.
I say you, Reverend.
1021 West Dixon Food Court. That doesn't ring a bell, does it? Now, Elaine, 12 commas would have historical meaning for everybody who took their meals in that space. But as Daddy said, there would be too much like Wright. And so it's called 1021 West Dixon Street Food Court. That's not good for my cussing condition.
Yeah.
Missionary Marshall, I'm saved, but I still have cussitis. Between Moore versus Dempsey and today, the criminal, legal, and punishment system has oppressed, terrorized, slaughtered, and disenfranchised black people, impoverished people, immigrants, working people, women and girls, and LGBTQI persons. The only difference between the August 1955 murder of Emmett Till in Mississippi and the August 24, 2019 slaughter of Elijah McClain is that Emmett Till was murdered in Mississippi by white vigilantes, while Elijah McClain was murdered by police officers in Aurora, Colorado. Like the hundreds of black men, women, and children murdered in Elaine, Emmett Till and Elijah McClain were slaughtered. As with the Elaine martyrs, the people who killed Emmett Till and Elijah McClain were never punished. Instead, black people were told, after Emmett Till and after Elijah McClain, to remain calm.
That's right.
Go about our business and trust the criminal, legal, and punishment system. To this day, the people who killed Elijah McClain have not been prosecuted. When George Zimmerman shot Trayvon Martin to death in Sanford, Florida on February 26, 2012, and was later acquitted in July 2013 of second-degree murder and manslaughter, we were told to remain calm and go about our business and trust the criminal, legal, and punishment system. When Darren Wilson shot Michael Brown Jr. to death August 9, 2014 in Ferguson, Missouri, and was not charged with a crime, we were told to go about our business, remain calm, and trust the criminal, legal, and punishment system. When Laquan McDonald was shot 16 times and killed by Jason Van Dyke, a Chicago, Illinois police officer, on October 20, 2014, we were told to go about our business, be calm, and trust the criminal, legal, and punishment system. We were told to be calm while politicians, and police officials lied about how McDonald was killed. The same way politicians and law enforcement officials lied and tortured witnesses and behaved after the Elaine Massacre in 1919. When Sandra Annette Bland was found hanged in her cell in Waller County, Texas on July 13, 2015, 3 days after her arrest after a traffic stop, her death was ruled a suicide, and we were told to go about our business, remain calm, and trust the criminal, legal, and punishment system. You notice the message. When Alton Sterling was shot to death by 2 police officers in Baton Rouge, Louisiana on July 5, 2016, we were told to go about our business and be calm and trust the criminal, legal, and punishment system. When Philando Castile was shot to death in Falcon Heights, Minnesota on July 6, 2016, the day after Alton Sterling was shot, we were told to go about our business and remain calm and trust the criminal, legal, and punishment system. When 2 Sacramento, California police officers shot and killed Stephon Clark in his grandmother's backyard on March 18, 2016, we were told to go about our business and remain calm and trust the criminal, legal, and punishment system. When Breonna Taylor was shot to death in her bed in Louisville, Kentucky, after at least 7 Louisville police officers broke into her apartment without warning on March 13, 2020, we were told to go about our business, remain calm, and trust the criminal, legal, and punishment system that has refused to this day to charge any of the police officers who killed us. They charged folks who shot into the apartment next to her, but have not charged anybody for killing her. When George Floyd was choked, I'm going to tell the story. When George Floyd was choked to death in Minneapolis, Minnesota on May 25, 2020 by a white officer named Derek Chauvin, who was supported by 3 other Minneapolis police officers, the public was first told he had a medical incident while he was taken to custody. I've seen the police report. After a video filmed by a brave black teenage girl was posted online, went viral, and prompted a public outcry, the prosecuting attorney of Hennepin County, Minnesota, stated during a May 28th press conference, 3 days after George Floyd was murdered, that, quote, there is other evidence that does not support a criminal charge, close quote. That prosecuting attorney is still in office. Both officials called for patience and urged the public to trust the process. Now, I mentioned those martyred black people to make the following point. It is time for morally sensitive, and I should say sensible people, to say that the criminal, legal, and punishment system is infested with racism, sexism, wealth privilege, and fascism. It is time for morally sensitive people to say that the American political and legal judicial system is infested with racism, sexism, wealth privilege, and fascism. It is time for us to say that one word describes these systems: unjust. Unjust. That's why I don't call it a criminal justice system. I call it a criminal punishment system. You can't say it's a criminal justice system if it is infested with injustice. It is also time for us to say that the much boasted American rule of law, respect the rule of law, is a sham.
That's right.
Yeah.
Notice how we were told to trust the same system that refused to prosecute murderers. Notice, and this is not in my prepared remarks, but notice that there has never been an Attorney General of Arkansas to do an investigation of the Elaine Massacre.
All right.
And I'm going to call some names.
Oh, right now.
Speak truth to power.
There was an Attorney General of Arkansas named Bill Clinton,
Oh, yeah.
Speak truth.
who later became President of the United States. He did not
No, it doesn't.
call for an investigation of the Elaine Massacre.
All right. Speak it.
There was an Attorney General of Arkansas named Leslie Rutledge now,
Oh, well, anyway.
who is filing lawsuits filing lawsuits against debt being canceled for students, but she will not investigate the biggest massacre of black people in this state.
Yes, man. Yes, sir.
And so it is time that we own up and just say that this system is unjust. And if that word doesn't come from Elaine first, where else should it come?
Right.
If anyone should say that, people of Elaine should say it, but if anyone should say it, those of us who are in solidarity with you should say it. We should not call this a justice system while we are watching every day the injustice happen. Well, I would remind you that that's just part of the problem. Because this criminal punishment and legal system has other sides to it as well. For instance, notice how the political process is being perverted by the way legislative districts are now being redrawn. After the 2020 election, notice the number of places that started making it harder for people to vote.
That's right.
And the people that made it harder to vote were, more often, black, Latinx, poor, and older people. I brought notes. Because, see, students, you should not ever show up without your backup.
Yes, sir. Speak it.
Look at somebody and say, don't show up without your backup.
Don't show up without your backup.
I'm here.
Don't show up without your backup, okay?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I was born and was educated and lived most of my 70 years in Arkansas. Last year, white Republican legislators in Arkansas redrew voting districts to fracture, to split, to break up communities of black and Latinx voters. And then they acted offended when black and Latinx leaders denounced the redrawn districts as discriminatory. The architects of those districts denied that they intended to discriminate against black and Latinx voters. Never show up without your backup, right? And when you show up, don't be afraid to name names. State Senator Jane English, a Republican from North Little Rock, sponsored a redistricting plan that divides Pulaski County, where I live and have lived since 1979, into 3 congressional districts. So now, if you live in Pulaski County, according to this thing, you have to go to 3 congresspersons, not 1, to get any kind of federal government help. She claimed she did not know. I'm not making this up. She claimed she did not know that the plan she sponsored broke part of North Little Rock into separate congressional districts. Now, Jane English claims she also didn't know that the redistricting plan she sponsored, which split part of North Little Rock. By the way, did I tell you that Jane English lives in North Little Rock? I mean, you know, I tell lawyers sometimes, I wear a t-shirt, but don't I have boo-boo the fool on it? She claims she did not know that this plan she had affected a community that was predominantly not white. She just happened to do it. Arkansas State Representative Nelda Spears, take her name down, is a Republican from Mountain Home in Baxter County. She initially proposed a redistricting plan that did not split any county, and then she later joined Jane English in co-sponsoring the map that split Pulaski County. Now, Pulaski County has the largest number of black and Latinx residents in Arkansas. During the debate on that map, Nelda Speaks claimed that no city in Pulaski County was split. In fact, the map that English and Spears co-sponsored divides voters in two municipalities, Little Rock and North Little Rock. So instead of saying, well, I don't know, she lied twice.
Okay.
Max Brantley, who does not look like me, he does not have my blessing of skin tone.
There you go.
He's You got to overthrow it.
Say it again.
Indeed.
Let me give you my final digression.
Okay.
Anybody who's built a wall understands the meaning of a plumb line.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
Carpenters know what a plumb line is. If you build a line, build a wall, what you want to do is you want to make sure it is straight all the way up. It's called in plumb. And when you do that, you have a device called a plumb line. You can go to the hardware store and get one. And hold up, weight on the bottom of it, and you hold it against the wall. If the wall is crooked, it's out of plumb. From the history of humanity, from the history of humanity, as long as folks have been building stuff that stood up straight, everybody has known that there is only one thing you can do with a wall that's out of plumb.
Help us, man. Help us.
Turn it down.
Help us. Yes, sir.
You cannot reform.
Yes, sir.
You cannot remodel. You cannot remake a wall that is out of plumb. That's why the Leaning Tower of Crooked is still leaning. It's called the Leaning Tower of Pizza, but it's still leaning. You can try to prop it up, but and the question for us is, as I bring this thing to a close, is when will we get the backbone to say this system is so out of plumb that it must be turned down.
Radical.
Radical revolution of values is what Martin Luther King Jr. demanded April 4th, 1967, a year to the day before he was shot to death. And that's why he was killed.
That's the record. That's the record.
That's why he was killed.
Yeah.
We remember.
Check it out, students. They got you learning the Martin I Have a Dream speech. Okay? Let me give you some homework.
Come on.
Read A Time to Break Silence.
Yes, sir.
Look at each other and say, A Time to Break Silence. Make a note. A Time to Break Silence. April 4, 1967, Riverside Church, New York City. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech.
Yes, he did.
He said it, and he called for a radical revolution of values. Not only did the faithful crave keeping this system, the Elaine Massacre showed that this systemic slaughter is happening every day. January 6, 2021 shows that they will fight to keep
They're
it.
fighting. Yes, they will.
Poisoned water in Flint, Michigan shows they don't mind poisoning women, children, and old people to keep it. Dirty water in Jackson, Mississippi shows they don't care. The hateful faithful will resort to violence, physical, political, commercial, religious, and otherwise to make this fascist system happen. And it is up to us
Yes, sir.
to make sure that future doesn't become the new version of the American nightmare, not the American dream. This ain't no dream. This ain't no dream. Wake the hell up. Okay? This is no dream. No, if you think this is a dream, go talk to Breonna Taylor's mom. If you think this is a dream, go talk to George Floyd's kinfolk. If you think this is a dream, go talk to the folks in Flint, Michigan who are still dreaming.
Oh, you're right.
This is a nightmare. And it's up to us to make sure this nightmare doesn't become the future. I'm glad to join you in this good work and look forward to doing more when I get out of this judgment job. Is a panelist And I love it when we call lawyers doctors because we have Juris Doctor's degrees, but nobody calls us doctors except people who are not lawyers.
That's right.
I mean, yeah, my degree is Juris Doctor, but it's not like Dr. Laurie Mansky's degree because she got a PhD. My wife's got a PhD. Dr. O's not a PhD. What I call showing up doctors. But you know, those of us who are lawyers, we just Juris Doctors, doctors of laws. And he leads the Mississippi Innocence Project. Dr. Carrington, take the mic and respond.
Thank you very much. I had, to be honest, I had my notes in my head, and then I started meeting people this morning, listening to the judge and others. I've rearranged what it is I want to say.
All right.
Let me start by saying one of the things that's been loveliest about this so far is just the energy and the sort of positivity of this group. And I want to begin and end by making sure you all understand how honored I am and my client, former client, Curtis Flowers, are to have been included. And one, I'll tell you, I'm going to start with a slightly off-color story about urination. But only because as I was walking around the room this morning, and I got to that second poster over there, the one adjacent to Judge Griffen's poster, the one that features Ralph Abernathy, James Foreman, Dr. King, Dr. Reverend Douglas, and John Lewis. And I was telling Curtis and Destiny Horn and others, my friends here, when I was a public defender in Washington, D.C. for years. And one of my colleagues was James Foreman, Jr. But at that point, James Foreman, Sr. was living in D.C. with his son. And James and I were good friends. But I had not met his father. We've been talking about age today. So anyway, I was in the bathroom, the men's bathroom at the public defender's office, doing what we do in the bathrooms. And this person comes in and stands beside me. And you know how you do. You sort of acknowledge, but not really. That someone standing beside you for us men out there.
Yeah.
It was James Foreman Sr.
Oh man, oh man,
Right.
oh man.
Now, you know, there have been times when I've been unable to go to the bathroom for various reasons. But being in the presence of greatness was the first for me. Anyway, I bring that up off the cuff today just to say that's the same kind of feeling I'm getting today being here, being in the presence of greatness. The other thing I wanted to say was about age, because that's come up a lot. I've been in contact with the judge and Mary Olson. I have not seen them. I figured Mary was in her early 40s. Likewise, the judge. Come to find out, they're in their late 40s. But there must be something about this work that keeps people young, whether it's righteous indignation or whatever it is. So I hope I drink some of what you're drinking. Just a couple of other things. Since we're naming names, I wanted to jump on the Bill Clinton train for 1 second. One of the most distressing stories about Bill Clinton was that in the middle of his first presidential campaign,
Right,
he was in New Hampshire. He
right,
was in a bunch of trouble with women.
right,
Oh, yeah.
right.
His stock seemed to be plummeting, and he really needed to be in New Hampshire and on the East Coast to gin up support once again after these revelations were coming out. But instead, he made a special trip back to Little Rock
Yes,
so that he could preside and deny a gubernatorial pardon for Ricky Ray Rector,
Right.
who was scheduled to be executed. For those of you that don't know the Ricky Ray Rector story, the very brief and sad part of it is, there's lots of sad parts, is after Mr. Rector had shot and killed a law enforcement officer in his parents' home, Mr. Rector walked outside and shot himself in the head
Right.
with the Chinaberry tree
Right.
and lived. But he lived in a way that was quite different from the way he had lived before. He was severely impaired,
Yes.
and on the eve of his execution,
Tell it.
when he ate his final meal,
Tell it.
he saved a piece of pecan pie for later.
Tell it.
Okay.
Tell
And
it.
went
Tell
out
it.
to his execution.
Tell it.
Bill Clinton flew home to make sure that he could tell everybody he was tough on himself.
Yeah. Truth.
I want to start with Mr. Flowers beside me, and I want to talk about two things. His case briefly, or as it's, I'm going to weave it in, but I also want to talk about the history. And I want to talk about how Moore v. Dempsey, there's a straight line between Moore and the case that saved Curtis Flowers' life.
Yes. Yes.
But I want to start at the end, or close to the end. And that was at the U.S. Supreme Court in 2019, when Mr. Flowers' case was argued. Not by me, thankfully, but by better lawyers from the Cornell death penalty clinic. But Sherry Johnson, who was Curtis's lead lawyer, got up. She was the petitioner, so she spoke first. And she got about a minute and a half into her sort of opening statement in front of the court, and she was interrupted by Justice Alito.
Yep.
And I'll never forget sitting there and listening to this question and being appalled, because he knew better, but appalled by what he asked. And what he asked Sherry Johnson, Curtis's attorney, was, what if we were to ignore the history of this case?
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Flowers had been tried 6 times, but he was speaking broader than that.
Yeah.
What if we were to ignore history? Would you still win? He asked Sherry. Well, she said yes, and he did win. But that question was so deeply offensive
Yes.
to anybody who knew anything about Curtis's case and about Montgomery County, Mississippi, and Winona. Ignore history. That was what his case was about.
Right.
It would
Right.
not have happened but for the history
Right.
of that region. Justice Alito knew what he was talking about.
Yes.
Yes, he did.
He knew what he was talking about. It was his agenda. Ignore history. He ultimately couldn't do it in Mr. Flowers' case, but he'd like to.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Speak.
Let me tell you a little bit about Winona, where Mr. Flowers was arrested and prosecuted 6 times. Mr. Flowers was convicted for a quadruple murder on Front Street,
Right.
a furniture store
Right.
in Winona. Front Street has a history. In 1902, a white man stepped out of the Winona Theater and walked down the street, Front Street, to have a word with the Negro, according to the newspaper accounts of the day. And evidently, the black man got the best of him, one way or the other. People left. The argument started again, and the black male who had been involved in the argument allegedly shot his white thumb. He ran, as he should have.
Yeah.
A mob formed, couldn't find the alleged perpetrator, but they found another white guy, hauled him out of his house, and lynched him on the street.
Right.
2 days later, they found the perpetrator and lynched him.
Oh,
Justice Alito wants us to ignore history.
yes.
Right.
Oh, my God.
Speak.
No one was ever charged
Oh, no.
for those 2 lynchings to
Right.
this day. They know about it. EJI knows about him.
Right.
Nothing's happened. Just 25 years later, 1937, 2 African American males are arrested in Winona for the murder of a white shopkeeper. They are on their way back from court in downtown Winona. They're kidnapped by a mob of white folks.
Yep.
Who put them, get this, into a school bus
Right.
and drive them out to Duck Hill, which is about 8 miles as the crow flies from Winona, where they're both chained to trees, blowtorched, set on fire. And Justice Alito wants us to ignore history.
Right. Speak.
Speak.
About 30 years later,
Tell the story.
just next to the off-color commentary I provided about going to the bathroom, Fannie Lou Hamer.
Right.
There you go.
He comes to the bus station in Winona. Wanted to sit with the white folks at Staley's Cafe, which was part of the bus station, connected to it. She and fellow SNCC workers got arrested. They were thrown into jail, and African American prisoners were forced to beat her. And you know, she never really recovered from those injuries.
Right.
She lived for a while longer, but she never recovered from the beating she got. And likely would have also been murdered, except for the fact that 3 posters down, Medgar Evers was assassinated later that week.
Right.
And the feds descended on Mississippi.
There it is.
And Winonans thought better of themselves and thought, we don't need to kill these folks. There's too many feds down here. We're going to get in trouble.
Right.
But the DOJ did prosecute the white folks who beat her, ordered the beatings in the jail. And one of the reasons I know this is because the trial was in Oxford, Mississippi, where I live,
Okay.
at the university. Courthouse was packed. Fannie Lou Hamer and the other people who were beaten testified. The defense attorney in the case, cross-examination and argument was that their beatings and their injuries were figments of their imagination. And an all-white jury acquitted all of the defendants. History, I know I'm preaching to the choir, especially after you're tall.
Come on.
History is a lie.
Preach. Preach.
History is a lie.
Preach.
Don't listen to Justice Alito.
Right.
When Moore v. Dempsey was decided in 1923, it was one of the first, really the first, case in the 20th century where the U.S. Supreme Court was willing to interject itself into the administration of state criminal courts.
Right.
Now, there are arguments to be made about the limits of Supreme Court power, some of which I agree with. It doesn't have the power of the purse, the U.S. Supreme Court doesn't. It can't call up an army.
Right.
What it has is the power of its legitimacy. Justice Alito, by the way, doesn't like people questioning the court's legitimacy. He said in the last couple of days. That's exactly what we're supposed to do. And the court should measure up or shut up about its legitimacy.
Right.
Its legitimacy is process.
Amen.
In Moore v. Dempsey, the court followed process.
Yeah.
And it did in the case of the Scottsboro boys
Yeah.
a few years later, Powell versus Alabama.
Right.
A few years later, after that, I'm leaving out some. Miranda,
Yes.
Gideon,
Yes.
right? The promise to a lawyer
Right.
for anybody charged with a crime that carries jail time. These are cases where the Supreme Court announces its legitimacy and follows the process. And then the case that brings us sort of full circle is Batson versus Kentucky,
Yes.
the case that saved Mr. Flowers' life. But that case is a little bit more complicated than people give it credit for.
That's right.
Give me a few minutes, if you will, to talk about it. Everybody with me?
Yes, sir.
I don't mean to be too much of a law professor up here.
Tell the truth.
Let me talk about Batson versus Kentucky. Batson versus Kentucky, for the first time, the U.S. Supreme Court put limits on the peremptory strike.
Yes.
And for those of you that don't know what a peremptory strike is, when you show up to jury service, the lawyers and the judge will ask you a bunch of questions about whether you can serve. Questions about, the easiest one is, this trial is about to last for 2 weeks. Can you give us 2 weeks? And some people say, I can't do that. I've got obligations. I'm taking care of my mother, my father. They have legitimate obligations.
Right.
And the court will say, you're excused. And then you're left with whoever's left. People who say, yes, I can serve. I'm qualified to serve. At which point, the lawyers get to exercise peremptory strikes.
Yeah.
And that is a strike for which, traditionally, you had to offer no reason at all.
Right.
You could strike whoever you wanted for any reason, up to the number of however many peremptory strikes you had. For the first time in Batson versus Kentucky, early 1980s case, the court said no longer can you use race as the basis to strike jurors.
Yeah.
That is now illegal. In Mr. Batson's case, out of Louisville, Kentucky, which you mentioned in your talk, Mr. Batson was accused of a burglary. He went to trial, jury trial, and the jury could not reach a verdict because the 3 African American jurors, among others, voted not to convict him. So the assistant state's attorney general prosecutor turned around, and retried the case. And this time he thought, well, I'll talk to the jurors, and I know who didn't like my case, the black folks. So this time around, I'll use my peremptory strikes to get rid of them all. And that's what he did. And Mr. Batson was convicted. His case went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and as I said, the court said no longer can you use race as a justification for a peremptory strike. Here's where it gets slightly complicated, but not really. The author of that opinion was Justice Lewis Powell. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia. My name, if I didn't mention it, is William Tucker Carrington, which if you know anything about Virginia, you know, oh yeah, he's from Virginia.
Yeah.
And I knew briefly Justice Powell through my father. He was, from all accounts, a nice person, a gracious person, a mannered person. And he said in the opinion that race shouldn't matter,
That's the way you say it.
that it doesn't matter.
What he said.
Sounds good. It's not true. Race matters.
Yeah.
Lived experience matters. That's why you all are here.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why the museum is going to be built and
Right.
dedicated. Because race, or I should say maybe history in this country, which obviously includes issues about race, matter.
Yes.
I appreciate Batson. I appreciate Justice Powell. But the court took the easy way out.
Yeah.
Race does matter. It should matter.
Absolutely.
And it mattered in Mr. Flowers' case.
Yes.
In the first, he was tried 6 times. He has the dubious distinction of being, as far as we know, the only person ever to have been tried 6 times calculately for the same offense.
Mm-hmm.
In the first trial, the prosecutor, who tried all 6, struck every black juror that was left on the panel.
Yep.
Jury convicted. Mississippi Supreme Court reversed the case on other issues. So there was a second trial. This time, prosecutor used all his strikes against black people also. The court put one black person on, though, as a violation of Batson. Jury convicted. Sentenced Mr. Flowers to death. Mississippi Supreme Court reversed again on other issues unrelated to the Batson claim. Third trial, prosecutor used all his strikes, get rid of all the black folks on the jury. Mr. Flowers was convicted. This time, the Mississippi Supreme Court reversed, finding a Batson violation. Mr. Flowers was locked up the entire time.
All right.
Mr. Flowers' fourth trial, it was a mixed race jury, for reasons I won't get into, but it was a mixed race jury. The jury couldn't reach a verdict. All the black folks were holdouts, for voting to acquit. There was a fifth trial. The prosecutor again used as many strikes as he could to strike all the black jurors, but ran out. There was one holdout in that case, an African-American man. Curtis and I have talked about this, who really probably saved Curtis's life.
Right.
He held out, refused to vote to convict, and for his efforts, was arrested and charged with perjury.
Yep.
That case was ultimately dismissed, but race matters. History matters. They tried Mr. Flowers for a sixth time. The prosecutor accepted the first African-American who was seated, peremptorily struck all the rest. 11 whites, 1 black. Mr. Flowers was convicted, and this time the Mississippi Supreme Court affirmed his conviction.
Oh, wow.
He ends up in the U.S. Supreme Court, and he wins based on his Batson versus Kentucky claim.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Came back to Mississippi, and the state of Mississippi and the Attorney General's office, after working with his lawyers, of which he had a cast of thousands, not being one of them, dismissed all the charges against him. He was gone.
Oh, right.
But if you go and read Mr. Flowers' opinion out of the U.S. Supreme Court, written by its newest justice at the time, Justice Kavanaugh, it is a victory. Mr. Flowers lived to see what we thought might be a 7th trial. Thankfully, it turned out that it wasn't, and he was exonerated. But if you read Flowers versus Mississippi, it's really only a victory for Mr. Flowers,
Right.
Oh, no.
and not for other folks.
Right.
Oh, now.
Right.
Oh, now.
Right.
The court treated Mr. Flowers' case as an anomaly,
Yes.
as a person who was tried 6 times. Surely this will never happen again. That's the question. That's what Justice Alito was getting at. Let's limit our view of history just to this case. Let's not pay attention to what happens in courtrooms across this country still every day,
Every day.
where prosecutors violate Batson versus Kentucky over and over and over again. Race matters. And at the risk of doing 2 people to dive into the legal weeds, I will say this about Mr. Flowers' case, in the opinion of the Supreme Court. There was a dissent
Tell it. Tell it. Tell
written
it.
by Justice Thomas.
Tell it.
Oh, come on.
Yes.
Now,
Tell it.
I don't have a lot of kind things, really any kind things, to say about Clarence Thomas.
I don't
And I don't have any kind things to say about Clarence, the first part of Clarence Thomas's dissent in Mr. Flowers' case. But I will tell you this, that the second part of his dissent is some of the most honest words out of this U.S. Supreme Court about race that have probably been written in the last 30 or 40 years. It's an astonishing opinion. It is schizophrenic.
course.
like Justice Thomas can be.
Of course.
It is, I think, written from someone who is a deeply complex person, but the last part of his dissent is worth reading because he says race matters. And I also said some pretty terrible things up front,
Right.
which I won't forget. But you should, I encourage you to read the opinion because race matters, as I've said. I guess I just want to end by saying this. Well, two things, really. Curtis is up here. He does not love public speaking. What he loves, much more, as many of you have found out, is hanging out with folks and talking, which you should feel free to do when we're done. But I just wanted to make that my theme. History matters.
Oh, yeah.
Got it all over the walls. I mean, it really viscerally matters.
Yes.
In the bathrooms, in
Yeah.
the courtrooms,
Yes.
in the museums. It just matters.
Yes.
You know, you stand next to someone, at least me, you know, a white guy, I was probably in my 40s at the time, standing next to James Foreman.
Yeah.
I mean, get out.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. I knew him. I mean, I watched Eyes on the Prize,
Yeah.
seeing him in his overalls,
Yeah.
speaking truth to power like only James Foreman could. And man, you can feel it. You can feel it. History matters. And I think that's why this morning I've just been so impressed and pleased and gratified and honored to have been allowed to drive over, all the way over from Oxford, Mississippi, where, by the way, this week we're celebrating the 60th anniversary
Right.
of James Meredith's integration
Right.
of Ole Miss.
Yeah.
I've got a few problems with the way we're celebrating it, but we're celebrating it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I hope you understand where I'm coming from. I'm very honored to be here. Pleased that you all invited me, included me. Thanks for staying so young. Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Now, I want you to stand next to a judge.
Okay.
You stand next to a judge, and the judge is going to protect you, okay? All right.
Okay.
And what you do is you speak the truth as you want to speak it, and you know you among family, all right? Okay, now take your microphone.
My name is Curtis Miles. I was tried and convicted back in '96, like
Speak up,
Chuck
Curtis.
told you. I did 23 years behind bars before I was exonerated. But I'm here and I'm still ticking on. And I will help fight this thing to the end. And I will share my story, my life with everyone. I just don't want to ever see anyone go through what I went through. Yes, and like I said before, I got locked out in the church singing gospel.
All right.
Every Sunday, every
Yeah.
Saturday.
You want to give us a little bit?
Oh.
Just a little bit. Just a little bit.
Sing something.
I've had some good days. I've had some hills to climb.
Sing your song, man.
I've had some weary days.
Yes, sir.
Sing.
And some lonely nights. But when I look around and I think things over,
I see it. Yes, sir.
all of my good days
Yeah.
Always my bad day.
What you said?
And
Yes, I'm with you.
I won't complain.
It is important that we in the community welcome back into community the people who have been taken from our community. Otherwise, they never are free. Okay? That's how come I wanted you to be up here, okay? Because see, it's natural if you've been institutionalized to want to be away from the people. But it's important for those of us who are free to say, no. That's what they did to you.
Beautiful.
But we're not going to let that happen.
All right.
That's not going to be okay. Oh, Linda Shelby. Sister Linda Shelby. You got to speak your truth. I'm bringing the mic to you, sister. You got a mic? Oh, Sister Linda got a big old mic. Linda got a big old mic. Somebody say, Linda got a big old mic. Linda got a big old mic. Linda got a big old mic.
You can count on my hands how many times in my whole life I've been to Elaine. But I've had relatives here. And I've had relatives that are from here. So it is very pleasing to me to be here today. My name is Linda K. Shelby. And while I was sitting here earlier, I wasn't trying to be presumptuous, and hold court. It's just that they told me that I was going to be on the panel, so I may as well come up here and sit.
Right.
And apparently nobody wants to sit with me. But I'm not complaining. But one lady was talking to me, and it struck me. She said, "But why are you on the panel today?" And I got to thinking, I don't have a law degree. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a famous writer. I'm not someone who has a special case around them. I'm just a community person. I'm a family person. And so I was thinking, why am I on this panel today? I am a heel.
Yeah.
And I am aware.
Yeah. All right.
I think that might be reason enough
Yes.
to be included amongst
That's right.
these discussions.
Hey.
And what I would like to talk about is my history. Because my history is your history.
Right.
But even I didn't realize that for a long time. My name is Linda K. Shelby. I feel like I'm a historian. I ended up teaching history in Helena, West Helena at Central High School.
Right.
Where I was one of the ones that integrated before we had total integration.
Right.
So that's another whole story. But I do have some things that happen in my life that makes me understand more what's happening to my Elaine part. Because the most important thing that I can share with you about my Elaine connection is I simply didn't know.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And like I said, I'm a heel and aware on both sides of my family. Elaine is my story.
Right.
Amen.
I was educated in Helena, West Helena, primarily. I was an Army brat until second grade, but that really doesn't count. But I was educated second grade through sixth grade at Westside Elementary School. I was educated from seventh grade to ninth grade at Eliza Miller Junior High School that used to be Eliza Miller High School.
That's right.
But then they changed it.
When it was the black school.
Yes. And when I got to 10th grade, they had a plan that was called freedom of choice. But we didn't get a chance to choose.
Right.
We were chosen.
There you
Right.
go.
They took the top 10%. And they said the top 10%, but there were 36 of us in secondary school at Central Junior and high school. And it was more students than that. Because now some, in order to go back to Miller, your parents had to come up and talk to officials and say, I want my child to go back to Miller. And a lot of parents did, and I kind of understand why they did. But my father, because my mother was crying and having a fit. Not my babies need to go back where they're safe. But my father said, if someone does not do it, if someone doesn't step up,
Right.
it won't be done.
Right.
We will give them an excuse to still take from our kids.
Yes.
Because I remember being in hand-me-down desks
Yes.
that
Yes.
had been duct taped and
Yes.
then brought to West Side School.
Say it. Say it.
Those were the new desks.
There you go.
I remember old raggedy books
Right.
Yep.
that kind of had a back, but it didn't have
Yeah,
a back.
but there you go.
You
There
know,
you got it.
and the pieces were missing out.
Yep.
I remember that.
Yeah.
And my father was a community activist, and he said, that's not right.
Right.
You get money for all the school kids.
Yeah.
Why can't our schools get new books?
Yeah.
Why can't our kids have field trips?
Yeah.
We, on our side of town, we didn't have field trips. I remember us getting, being allowed as a group to walk over to Second Baptist Church, which was a block and a half from the school, and we walked because someone who had gone to Africa had wanted to talk to us and show us things. And that was our field trip.
Yeah.
I guess it was literally a field trip because we walked. We didn't get a bus. The safety patrol, had the little signs and stuff, and like I said, it's about a block and a half. So my father said, if we don't do it, if we don't allow it, then it will never, come to pass. So I ended up graduating from Central High School in the last class of Central High Indians and Eliza Miller Buccaneers.
All right then.
And I claimed both classes. I went to both class reunions.
Right.
But they should have been one.
Yeah.
A long time before. The reason I point out my education, because especially in elementary school and junior high school, I was taught, I had some African American teachers who were wonderful. They were really smart. I had a math teacher who, we had some, different problems in math, but my dad would come up to the school and present problems every Friday. And they were always algebraic problems, trigonometry problems, way out of our universe. But my math teacher would help us work on them so that when Mr. Shelby came in, of course now, my dad told me, and I didn't tell them, the $5 the $5 prize that he was offering was my allowance. If I wanted allowance, I better win figuring out that problem. And I was accused of your daddy told you. I said, no, it's just, I gotta have my $5. But those same teachers had, I don't know if like if you remember Federated Club,
Yeah.
4-H Club, and those were my same, adults who sponsored those things. And in those clubs, they told us about Marian Anderson and about Paul Robeson and about, national black people who we should be proud of. They told us things, like I said, national black people that we should be proud of. But nobody told us about Elaine.
Right. Right.
And I just wonder if they knew. I knew that they didn't tell us. They told us a little bit about Helena, African American history, because Centennial Baptist Church is there.
Right.
And the National Baptist Convention and
E.C. Morris.
E.C. Morris, my mind was blank, but E.C. Morris was important in that, as well as Centennial Baptist Church. So I did get a little bit of local history, but not really. When I say not really, it was the National Baptist Convention angle that was,
Right.
And so I knew that all black folks were not just country, lazy people or workers and unintelligent people who had no education. But they did not tell me about me, my family, Phillips County being really significant.
Right.
They did not tell me about Elaine. My grandmother was Gertrude Ware Hill.
Where?
And she was my North Star. I was her oldest grandbaby. And I'm not saying I was spoiled. I was not spoiled. I just had a lot of attention until the rest of them folk. And she taught me how to cook things. She told me stories about when she was little. And it was a little confusing because she lived on a farm, a nice big farm on Coffee Creek. And her father farmed, and he farmed a lot of acreage. And she remembered, she was the baby of a family of 4. And she remembered getting all dressed up and riding to church in a carriage that was pulled by matching bays. So I kind of got the impression that we wasn't that far poor.
That's right.
Right.
We might not have been rich, but we had a little bit of handkerchief to wave in there. And she was born in 1909.
All right.
And by the time she was 5th grade, because they had a little schoolhouse out there. She wasn't in the schoolhouse anymore. She was going to school in St. Louis.
Excuse me.
Now, what she described was a childhood that was wonderful. The family was respected. They went to church every Sunday. And then they were in St. Louis, and she was going to school there, where she wasn't exactly special. And her father was an elevator operator.
Yeah.
And he missed farming.
Yeah.
And after she completed school, which was 8th grade at that time, somewhere after that, they went back. Well, first they went to the Missouri Boot Hill because we had cousins there, and he farmed a little bit. But his heart was to come back to Phillips County.
Right.
And they came back to Phillips County, and he leased some land, but it wasn't the same.
No.
They did not have carriage
Right.
with the babies. They went to church, but sometimes, somebody in the wagon had to pick them up or something. It just was a totally different kind of existence. And it didn't make sense to me, but I didn't know the questions to ask. She was courted by a young man from Coffee Creek, whose father was a minister, and he had taught at Southland College. And they had a farm, but basically my granddaddy and his brothers did the work on the farm because Grandpa just was not much of a farmer. That's probably why he was teaching over at Southland College. But they had a pretty good life. But by the time my grandfather proposed to my grandmother, they had lost their farm.
Mm-hmm.
So they got married and decided to move up to Helena, West Helena, and work in the mill, which was a big jump from their childhood and now their young adulthood. But I didn't know what questions to ask because it really didn't make any sense.
Right.
And I was fully grown, and I did a lot of community work. And I got an opportunity to go to, and I still can't remember the name of that center, but it's in Tennessee, up in the Smoky Mountains, where they took Highlander, that's
There you
it,
go. There you go.
where they trained
Active.
activists. And while I was up there, somebody walked up to me and said, "Oh, you're from Arkansas. What part of Arkansas are you from?" I said, "The Delta." And they said, "Well, you're probably kind of familiar. You may not live too, you may not be that close. But the Elaine riots."
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, "Huh?" I have no idea what you're talking about. So Highlander has this big library, and it has all of these old newspaper articles. The library, half the library is old newspaper articles and stuff. And so they took great joy in taking me in there and pulling out old Memphis commercial appeals. Not made up stuff, old Arkansas Gazettes.
Yep.
Old Tri-State Defenders,
Yeah.
and Daisy Bates
Right.
paper, the old copies of that, where it talked about this massacre in Elaine.
Yeah.
And it started calling names, and I was like, I know these names.
Yeah.
Because one thing about my grandmother, she told me the family names, because that's important in my family. You need to know the family name.
Right.
And in our family names are repeated. And I got to reading, and I recognized names. But these people could not be the people that I knew, the cousins that I knew. And then I remember, we repeat names in my family.
Yeah.
So I couldn't wait to get home and talk to my grandmother, because surely she knew all about this. Because my grandmama was the smartest person in the world.
Of course.
Anything I wanted to know, I wouldn't ask my grandmama. How to make $1 million? I go ask my grandmama, and she give me an answer.
And that'd be right.
I asked my grandmother, and she said, weren't we supposed to do something this afternoon? And I was like, well, and I said, okay, well, then, she distracted me. And so I asked her again later on, and she said, what are you talking about? I said, the 1919 Elaine riots. And she said, in 1919, I was 10 years old. Okay. I kept pushing her, but she was giving up nothing. And then she was asked to be interviewed. She was one of the volunteers during Black History Months at the local library, Helena Library, where she would go and she would regale, I said the children, but I mean adults pulled up. She could just tell you Brer Rabbit stories, the little hen, she knew all of these stuff and no book. She recited poems and and they got to a place where they didn't wait till Black History Month. They tried to have a storytelling month every month, and they would invite her. And so when the name just escaped me, the guy who did the Persistence of the Spirit display for Arkansas Heritage, and they take it around to the different centers. He was in Helena, and they had the library had recommended that he talk to her, and she was in her 80s then. And so, he did reach her on the phone, and she said, "I don't do anything without my grandbaby." So, we made an appointment so I could be there with her. And unlike other people who had tried to interview my grandmother, number one, he didn't say anything about the Elaine riots. He just talked about or asked her questions like, where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? How did you move around? Tell me about your daddy, your mother. I understand you were the baby of the family because her oldest brother and her oldest sister stayed in St. Louis. And when the family returned, the baby boy and my grandmother came back. But again, it was a different life. And they even thought about going back, but my great-grandfather just refused to go back. But it was a totally different life. And like I said, this guy was a genius because he didn't say, tell me about the Elaine riots. Why won't you talk about it? He just asked different questions about it. Well, didn't you have people in your family named, they lived in Coffee Creek, they lived in Elaine? I mean, what's going, do you remember anything about them? And all of a sudden, it was like, maybe it's time. Understand, she was 10 years old in 1919. But she was brilliant, and she listened to grown people. You know how you don't listen to grown people, you behind over here and stuff. My grandmama was the smartest person in the world, and she didn't talk a lot, but she heard a lot. And she began to tell him, because he did finally say, well, why didn't you tell these kind of things? Isn't it time to speak up? And she said, we had family members who disappeared.
Yeah.
And some of them, when I was full grown, I heard from again. And some of them I didn't. And some of them left, and their name was Robert. And then when I met them again in Chicago, their name was something else, Cecil. And the one thing that I did know that was really
was that if anybody, especially anybody white, asked you about any of these people who were gone, don't tell them anything.
Right.
Their life depends on it. And they told that to a 10-year-old girl who was 85 years old. And she was still keeping the family alive.
Yeah.
My grandfather almost got beat because I asked him about it. I asked Grandpa about it, Aaron Hill. And he was like, "Oh, girl, I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you want some more of this candy?" And my granddaddy Hiram said, "Don't talk about that." And I said, "Okay." And I asked him again later on. He said, "You ask me about that again, and I'm gonna beat you." And I was crushed because my grandfather just adored me. I got away with stuff that my young aunt couldn't get away with. But he was serious because they were keeping the family alive.
Right.
You just don't talk about it. And if you get a message that someone in the family, but maybe not a name, needs your help or needs to get a message to somebody, they did. But you just didn't talk about it. When the guy from Persistence of the Spirit talked to my grandmother, and I guess she got comfortable, and he kept pointing out the fact that, it had been 75 years ago. I learned more about my family than I had all my life. From a woman who taught me how to cook and manners and how to sit up straight and how to pronounce words and, but she did not tell me about Elaine.
Yeah.
Now, the one thing she did tell me after the guy left was it wasn't a riot. She said he was calling it Elaine riots, but it was not a riot. It was a massacre. And people died. And people escaped, and they may as well have died.
Yeah.
Because their families never heard from them again. And people who stayed still lost everything. And they were trying, there were people who stayed who tried to do the right thing. Do the right thing, do what they were told and stuff. But they suffered too. At 85, was still protecting her family. That is where the Elaine riots touched me the most. Because like I said, my grandmother was my North Star. And she told me everything. And the one thing she did not tell me was about Elaine. This is my heritage, just like it's your heritage. And we need to make sure that it's reformulated, it is reshaped, so that it becomes a positive part of our heritage, our history. And part of the positive part is 10-year-olds protected the family.
Yeah.
Amen.
And I'm not 10 anymore,
There you go.
but it's my job to keep protecting the family and do what we can do to make things right. I thank you for allowing me to to share in this occasion.